Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world ruled not by logic, but by law specifically. The kind of law that makes you wonder how anyone survived without tripping over their own obligations. You're not just walking through medieval Europe tonight. You're walking straight into the legal code of a dynasty so particular, so impossibly detailed, that it might take 3 scrolls just to explain how to groom your mustache. Yes, we're talking about a place where forgetting to bow in the right direction could cost you a finger, and sneezing during a royal procession might get you exiled if you were lucky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just after dawn, the mist still lifting from the castle walls, and the stone streets beneath your sandals slick with dew. You're in the heart of the late 14th century, give or take a few centuries, depending on how fast your donkey cart made it through the mountains. The air smells of damp parchment, old wool, and something charred that you choose not to investigate further. This is the capital of the Wolfpine Dynasty, fictional kingdom we'll say existed somewhere between Bavaria and whatever sounds mysterious and old. Its chronicles didn't survive the centuries, but its code of laws, somehow preserved, miraculously so. Probably because no one dared throw them out. These aren't your ordinary don't steal or don't murder kind of rules. Number. These are the other rules, the ones someone had to break first, prompting an emergency scribe meeting where a very serious monk with a bald spot scratched out a new clause using ink made of crushed beetles. Welcome to a realm where the laws tell you how many bells your goat is allowed to wear, and what punishment befits someone who insults your shoes. And yes, that's in there. Specifically, Article 137, Footwear Disputes and Provocations. You walk through the city's lower quarter, past wooden homes tilting gently toward one another like old gossipers. On your left, 2 washerwomen are discussing what sounds like a scandal involving fermented turnips and a local monk. You make a note never to drink anything purple in this town. A young page brushes past you, his boots coated in horsehair, carrying a scroll twice his size. He's headed to the Council of Ordonnances, the Empire's living brain of bureaucracy. That's where today's journey begins. The council chamber is larger than it needs to be, probably to intimidate the peasants and mildly terrify the scribes. There are banners hanging from every column, each embroidered with the symbols of a profession: a plough, a quill, a chicken. You wonder how often the chicken one comes up in legal arguments. Spoiler: frequently. At the center sits the Lord Ordinator, a man so aged he might remember when the code was first penned. He's flanked by 2 assistants and a large leather-bound tome, the Codex Justitatis Lupinae. It contains the laws, legends say, of all 643 articles passed during the dynasty's 3-century rule. Some are strict, some are baffling, and some are just deeply specific. Take, for example, Article 77. A hat worn indoors by a man not in mourning shall be considered an act of defiance, unless said hat is green and worn on a Tuesday. Historians still argue whether this was meant to curb rebellious fashion trends, or whether someone's nephew once wore a silly hat and got too many laughs at a banquet. Either way, it became law. Your guide for today's reading is Brother Petrick, a scribe with inky fingers and the energy of someone who's not allowed to drink the good wine. He begins with one of the most beloved oddities of the code, Article 18, on the matter of goat placement. The law states that no goat shall be tethered within a prayer hall, save for emergencies involving fire, childbirth, or royal visitation. Apparently, at least once in Dynasty history, a goat made it into a cathedral during a coronation, panicked, and destroyed half the altar. The resulting legislation was swift and oddly poetic. Let no bleating disturb the sacred chants, lest the gods mistake it for irreverent mockery. As Petrick reads on, you begin to realize something. Every one of these rules has a story behind it. A weird, wild, almost unbelievable story. You can see the outlines of human chaos in the legal language. Someone somewhere did something ridiculous, and now it's enshrined forever in medieval ink. Article 204. Any individual who throws bread at a noble may be fined thrice the weight of said loaf in coin or goats. Presumably, someone once got a little too enthusiastic at a feast and yeeted a baguette at a baron. Probably deserved it, honestly. Another favorite among scholars is Article 309, which deals with musical etiquette. A lute may not be strummed after moonrise unless the player be engaged in a courtship or a duel. That's right, you can only woo or threaten someone with a lute after dark. Otherwise, immediate confiscation of said lute and a mandatory apology performed in verse. Quirky tidbit. There's a surviving ballad supposedly composed by a man fined under this law. It's called The Moon Was Up, But I Was Alone, and it's genuinely kind of sad. You leave the council and head into the marketplace, a lively chaos of shouting vendors and wooden stalls. Everywhere you spot the signs of the law. Posted scrolls nailed to beams, symbols etched into cobblestones, official messengers rattling off fines like auctioneers. A fruit seller warns a boy not to handle the pears too vigorously, citing Article 62. No produce shall be fondled for longer than the span of a paternoster. That's the time it takes to say the Lord's Prayer. Yes, the law measured time in prayers. Very efficient, very holy, very hard to enforce when someone speaks fast. Even the city's stray cats have legal standing. Article 401. A feline of 3 stripes or fewer shall not be chased, save if it steals from an open bakery. And Article 402. Cats of noble bearing are exempt from window tax. You wonder how one determines a cat's nobility, possibly by hat. As you wander back through the alleys toward your inn, a town crier recites new additions to the code, recently approved by the High Bench of Traditions. One involves excessive sneezing in public forums. Another warns against slanderous humming, which was apparently a political weapon during succession crises. Who dares hum the tune of rebellion? Someone once asked. The law's answer, none but fools and birds. The moon rises now, casting silver over the rooftops. You rest on a bench beneath a leaning statue of Lady Rect Patroness, of obscure bylaws. Someone has tied a red ribbon around her sword, likely in protest or celebration. Maybe both. That's the thing about laws in this world. They aren't just commands. They're stories, frozen moments of absurdity wrapped in ritual. Historians still argue whether the Wolf Pine Code was serious governance, or just a very elaborate form of performance art. Some claim it kept order. Others think it was designed to mock order. But you, sitting there beneath the stars, think something else entirely. You think it was meant to be remembered, not obeyed, just remembered. You rise. The city sleeps behind you. The laws remain. scribbled into history not because they were followed, but because someone thought they might be. And that's the weird beauty of it. Not the power of the law, but its belief in the possibility of order in a world full of goats, lutes, and rebellious bread rolls. You wake to the sounds of bells. Not church bells, those toll slowly, gravely, like they're narrating their own echo. No, these are tinny, uneven bells hanging from the belts and beasts of the morning market crowd. And as you sit up on the straw-stuffed cot in your corner inn-room, you remember Article 15. The hour of rising shall be signalled by no fewer than 9 bells, from no fewer than 3 species of creature. It's absurd. Yes, but you listen closer. 1 bell from a mule, 1 from a goat, and Yason from a child's ankle bracelet. The rule is obeyed. Or at least, it's obeyed enough. You stretch, mindful of the fact that stretching too widely in the presence of a window was, for a short decade, banned under wolf-pine law as an indecent display of ribs. No one enforces it anymore, but old habits cling like cobwebs. Outside, the streets are coming alive with a kind of regulated chaos. Merchants align their carts at 45-degree angles because that's Article 89. Of course, and nobles trot their horses past in pairs, never solo. That's Article 23. No noble shall appear in motion alone, lest they be mistaken for commoners or poets. There's no greater insult to a wolf-pine baron than being confused with a creative type. As you make your way toward the city's east wing, your path crosses a man being loudly fined for the most delightful infraction. Wearing more than 1 feather in a cap during a day of fasting, the guard explaining the charge does so with a deadpan delivery that suggests this is not his first feather-related offense of the week. The man, possibly a brewer, based on the scent, looks genuinely baffled. "It's a small feather," he protests, and the guard sighs. "But it is a second feather, and today is St. Gerlach's abstention." This is where things get truly odd. You see, the Wolf-Pine Code didn't only regulate the things that might keep peace, like noise or theft. It ventured bravely into the metaphysical, into dreams, shadows, even the behavior of ghosts. For instance, Article 512 states, if a dream features the monarch unclothed and the dreamer wakes weeping, no offense shall be recorded. If the dreamer wakes laughing, it shall be considered treason in spirit. You wonder how often this was enforced, and what poor soul confessed to a traitorous chuckle during dream recollection. Probably during one of the official monthly dream audits, which yes existed for about 27 years. And then there's the category of supernatural codes. These read like poetry written by a paranoid man who saw a bat once and never emotionally recovered. Article 613. The owl's cry at noon shall be heeded with silence, and all pickled goods covered with cloth. It's unclear whether the owl was seen as a bad omen, a rival to the state, or a known pickle thief. The records don't specify. Historians still argue whether the supernatural articles were meant seriously, or merely included to placate the rural lords, who were notoriously suspicious of sunlight, mirrors, and women named Beatrix. You wander now toward the town's central square, where you're told a new copy of the Codex Justitatis Lupinae is being read aloud by the town reciter. It's a monthly ritual, required by Article 2 itself. No code shall stand in silence. It must be sung, shouted, or solemnly hummed to remain valid. It's like a software update, but medieval, musical, and enforced by threat of goat confiscation. Today's reader is a boy barely 12, standing on a milk crate, his voice cracking as he recites the latest amendments. One involves the proper emotional tone for apologies involving fish. Apparently, when caught throwing carp at a tax collector, one must apologize in a tone deemed sincerely damp with remorse, not flippant nor briny. It's hard to say whether the lawmakers were poets or just incredibly bored aristocrats. You pass a group of scholars by the fountain, scribbling notes on clay tablets. One of them catches your eye and grins. "Studying Article 381, he says. The one about nighttime whistling. You nod politely, pretending you're familiar, and he elaborates, "It forbids whistling near cemeteries after moonrise unless you carry a potato and a written prayer." "Why the potato?" you ask. "No one knows," he says, delighted. Possibly a mistranslation of protetto, the old word for talisman. Or maybe someone once scared off a ghost with a root vegetable. Hard to say. You can't tell if he's joking. You hope he is. Lunch is served in a tavern with uneven floors and a fireplace that only works when insulted. You order broth and bread, being careful not to point at the menu because that's seen as aggressive under Article 128. Gestures toward ink shall be taken as symbolic challenges and must be met with a duel of proverbs. Better not risk it. You simply nod. The innkeeper, used to silent diners, serves you with a wink. The man next to you eats his stew without touching his spoon. You learn why when the innkeeper mutters that he's avoiding a fine. Turns out there's a tax on cutlery today. Article 445, a seasonal regulation about metal surfaces during periods of celestial alignment. It's nonsense, probably, but no one wants to be the first to test it. Later in the day, you visit the guild hall of the Umbrella Menders, a quiet group who've recently won a court battle regarding Article 299. Rain protections shall not exceed the width of a goat unless designed by certified artisans. One mender proudly shows you the stamped seal of certification, burned into the wood of his parasol's handle. "Keeps the weather and the sheriffs off my back," he says, chuckling. Some rules are tragically outdated. Article 91, for example, restricts how loudly a woman may laugh in public based on her marital status and how many birds she owns. The louder the laugh, the more birds required. Single women are allowed only one snort or chortle unless accompanied by a relative. Thankfully, that one hasn't been enforced in decades, but it's still on the books. And then there are the festival clauses. These are almost theatrical. Article 531 dictates how one must walk during the Feast of St. Bruno. All motion must be in a zigzag pattern to mimic the blessed confusion of the saint's revelation. St. Bruno, legend has it, received divine inspiration after being spun around blindfolded by his cousin. The holiday commemorates that moment with public staggering. Try walking straight and you'll get strange looks and a small fine. Even animals aren't free from legal drama. Dogs are regulated by Article 172, which requires them to bark no more than thrice per moonrise unless alerted by plague, fire, or taxation. Enforcement is complicated. You finish the day at the edges of town, where a crumbling pillar stands bearing the remains of Article 600. The sunset shall not be watched directly by more than 7 people at once, for fear of blending shadows and confusing spirits. It was meant to be a protection against spiritual misalignment, or perhaps just a way to limit loitering. Either way, 7 is the limit. Tonight, you're number 6. The sun slips away, casting gold across the mountains. You think of all the rules you heard today, the ones that made you laugh, raise an eyebrow, or question the emotional well-being of whoever drafted them. And yet, as absurd as they seem, they carry something strangely human. You imagine the council chambers, the scribes, The debates about feathers and fish tone and zigzag walking. You imagine people real, flawed, funny people arguing passionately about goat distances and ghost potatoes. And you smile. Because this, too, is history. Not the grand wars or epic loves, but the tiny, oddly touching rules that tried to make sense of a world far messier than paper could contain. The next morning, you're awoken not by bells this time, but by the furious rustling of parchment outside your window. The town scribe is arguing again with the municipal postrunner about an amendment to Article 34. All missives must be sealed with wax bearing either the sender's sigil or, failing that, the image of a well-fed cat. The runner refuses to deliver the message on the grounds that the seal depicts a suspiciously thin feline and thus might be fraudulent. You roll over, pull your blanket higher, and think about how strange it is to live in a place where letter authenticity is determined by feline plumpness. But such is life under the Wolfpine Code. The Dynasty didn't just regulate trade, crime, or civic behavior. No, it extended its grip over domestic life in the most microscopic, meddlesome ways imaginable. Your next stop? A house inspection. Not for your house. Thankful you're just tagging along with a local clerk named Arno, whose job is to ensure compliance with Article 77. Each household shall maintain no fewer than 3 wall hangings depicting either harvests, moral allegories, or scenes involving geese. Geese, you learn, are considered moral creatures by the Dynasty. Why? Historians still argue whether it's because of their fierce protectiveness, their tendency to honk disapprovingly at anything improper, or because one of the royal scribes had a beloved pet goose who once bit a burglar. Whatever the case, wall art involving geese is highly encouraged. A home without goose representation might invite rumour fines. Inside the inspected cottage, you see one tapestry of a golden wheat field, another of a hooded figure handing out bread to children, and a third your favourite of a goose triumphantly chasing a jester into a river. Arno checks his little checklist, nods solemnly, and gives the family a stamped token of compliance. They'll sleep easier now, he says, as though this house narrowly avoided a haunting. As you leave, you ask him about the most ridiculous rule he's ever enforced. He doesn't hesitate. Article 199. No domestic broom shall be taller than its owner's nose. People had to saw down brooms. Some tried to wear platform shoes. You imagine a proud widow in 5-inch clogs, sweeping with defiance. The Dynasty was obsessed with symbolic proportion. Everything tools, clothes, utensils shad to align with your body. There's even Article 201. The length of one's belt may not exceed the width of their shadow at noon. You spend a full 10 minutes trying to picture how that's enforced. Arno just shrugs. Shadows are tricky, but belts easier to measure. Down by the bakery, you witness another odd enforcement. A flour weighing ritual dictated by Article 53. The flour must be weighed not only for quantity, but also for purity of mood. A cheerful baker might find their flour declared light with virtue, while a grumpy one gets docked for melancholic grist. The miller at this stand seems too chipper to be believed. You suspect he's overcompensating to avoid yet another fine. And here comes the pickle, again literally. At the market, a vendor is gently rearranging jars of pickled vegetables to align with a visiting official's sash color. This is part of Article 322, one of the color harmony laws, which states, "No preserved food shall be displayed in hues clashing with civic garments on days of royal visitation." It's the sort of rule that seems nonsensical until you realize it was likely penned by a former court artist with a grudge against pickled beets. You sit on a bench to take in the scene, breathing in the mix of vinegar, fresh bread, horse sweat, and wet stone. And it dawns on you that rules like these weren't always about order. Sometimes they were about image, ritual, a desperate grasp at dignity in a chaotic, feudal world where the weather could ruin crops, lords could declare war at a whim, and ghosts were widely believed to be poor listeners. In the afternoon, you're invited to a wedding. You arrive curiosed, you leave confused. The ceremony is governed by no fewer than 47 separate rules from the dynasty's marital codebook. Article 451 requires that the bride carry a bundle of sage, rosemary, or something mildly fragrant but not distracting. Article 457 mandates the groom's boots must squeak no more than thrice while approaching the altar. Article 460: if the ceremonial chicken crosses the threshold unaided, it is a good omen. If it balks, the marriage must be postponed 1 fortnight, and a blessing sought from a shoeless monk. No one knows why the monk must be shoeless, but everyone pretends to know someone whose cousin ignored the rule and ended up with 14 children, none of them particularly punctual. At the reception, you hear musicians arguing about the tempo of the third dance. It has to align with Article 464, lest the rhythm offend elderly guests or summon the wrong memory spirits. One violinist insists on a brisk 3/4 beat. The drummer, however, recalls an incident last spring involving a haunting tied to improper percussion at an uncle's wake. They compromise with a slow 6/8. As the night wears on and cider flows, a man seated beside you offers one of the juiciest stories you've yet heard, the tale of Article 579. This regulation, known colloquially as the Law of the Melting Hat, decreed that, on Midsummer Eve, any hat that begins to droop due to heat shall be declared a bad omen, and the wearer must either sing a lullaby aloud or give up 3 onions to the nearest widow. You almost choke on your cider. 3 onions? He nods. No exceptions, not even for clergy. You leave the wedding with the haunting image of a monk in a droopy hat singing softly to himself as a widow clutches her onion bounty. The next morning, you accompany the village Beltunarius. That's a job on his rounds. Under Article 129, all bells within municipal boundaries must produce tones that reflect the mood of the season. Winter bells should ring low and melancholy. Spring bells may be bright, but not cheeky. Summer bells, optimistic but grounded. And autumn, wistful, with a trace of longing. The bell tuner has an ear like a bard, and the patience of a saint. You watch as he adjusts a cracked chapel bell using only beeswax and a wooden wedge carved in the shape of a stoat. Tone matters, he whispers. You don't want a joyful bell in a mourning month. That's how rebellions start. Later, you tour the Code Valter, literal underground archive of every rule ever passed by the dynasty. It's more than a library. It's a labyrinth. Thousands of scrolls, tablets, and pigeon feather bookmarks. You see articles never enforced, like the infamous Article 666. All towns must plant 1 tree that leans westward to honor the king's left toe. Others were repealed quickly, like Article 711, which forbade left-handed butter spreading. Too many injuries, apparently. One archivist tells you about Article 388. During a thunderstorm, no mirrors may face north. You ask why. She sighs, pushing up her spectacles. Because the north winds carry memories, and the mirrors might trap them. You can't tell if she's serious. Maybe she can't either. Back in your room that night, you light a small candle, just one, to avoid violating Article 101, no more than 1 flame per sleeper, lest dreams become crowded. You chuckle, then pause. What if the rule was meant literally? Laying back, you think of everything you saw today. the goose tapestries, the squeaky shoes, the angry post-runner, and the cautious pickle vendor. The people here live under a code so elaborate it feels like a game played on expert difficulty with extra side quests. And yet, despite it all, they live, they adapt, they invent ways to obey, to dodge, to reinterpret. That's the true charm of the Wolfpine dynasty. Its people are not merely rule followers, they're artists of compliance, bending logic like willow branches, always stopping just short of breaking. You smile as you drift off. And somewhere, in the depths of the code vault, another rule waits to be discovered. Perhaps about candles, perhaps about dreams. You wake to distant bells ringing in a tone that sounds hopeful. You try to remember what season was it supposed to be again. If the bells are ringing with springtime optimism, then perhaps today is one of those rare sanctioned days where certain rules are temporarily lifted. You heard a merchant call it a brevity holiday when Article 203 is suspended, allowing citizens to speak plainly and without metaphor. You can't decide whether to celebrate or mourn the loss of poetic grumbling. But there's no time to ponder. You're off to witness what the dynasty calls a judicial elegance day, a public demonstration of laws that nobody has broken in the past 12 years but that still remain on the books. Why? For ceremony, for spectacle, for what they call moral resonance. Today's rule of honor is Article 482. No man may wear the feather of a red-tailed thrush unless he has single-handedly wrestled a tax ledger from the claws of a drunken owl. You blink at the official pamphlet. You reread it. The ink doesn't change. This is, apparently, a real law. And at some point in the past, someone did that. Or said they did. And now a man in a green robe is holding a feather aloft, while another dressed as a clearly disoriented owl hoots unconvincingly and claws at a scroll. The children love it. But the strangest part of the whole affair is how utterly normal this has become to you. You sit among the townsfolk on bleachers made of repurposed hay carts and old courtroom benches, clapping at the owl thief pantomime, and wondering whether Article 97, all applause must be delivered with alternating hand positions on odd days, is still enforced. Later, you stroll through what the locals call the quiet lane. It's silent not by choice, but by decree. Article 14. All lanes designated as quiet shall remain free of shouting, singing, bargaining, or overly jubilant whistling from sunrise to sundown. The story goes that a beloved court herbalist once lived here and needed silence to cultivate melancholy mosses used in grief tinctures. So the law stands, long after the moss has stopped growing. You tiptoe through the lane, passing a man who drops a tomato and nearly faints from the noise it makes. A child sneezes and is immediately hugged into submission by her mortified mother. Even the horses seem to clop more politely. It's surreal, but somehow soothing. You wonder if your hometown could use a quiet lane, or at least a less yelling avenue. In the afternoon, you're treated to an unexpected delighted invitation to observe a dinner regulated entirely by the monarchy's table code. This is the legendary Article 600 through 680, a labyrinthine mess of edible rules, mouthful timing, bread handling etiquette, and a deeply complicated system for determining when it's acceptable to groan with satisfaction. You sit at the corner of a long carved oak table in the home of a minor official named Garrett. He's clearly practiced. Before anyone eats, he recites the opening blessing of balanced proportion required by Article 601, where all limbs must be visible and hands positioned in mirrored repose. You try to mimic everyone, but your elbow leans too far left, and you receive a polite note slid under your spoon reading simply, "Tilt right." The meal begins. Course 1. Turnip paste, arranged to resemble a noble's crest. You must eat clockwise, starting at the emblem's smallest point, to show humility, says Garrett, chewing thoughtfully on a root swirl. Article 609 mandates that each bite be followed by a subtle facial expression, nothing so coarse as a smile, but something that implies both appreciation and restraint. Course 2. Pigeon stew with floating bread slices that act as metaphorical islands. You're told the bread must be eaten before the meat, unless it's Wednesday, and the pigeons were hunted on a hill. Today is Thursday, but no one is sure about the hill. A mild panic ensues. Garrett quietly declares it a stream pigeon, and dinner continues without incident. Dessert is a candied plum, presented under glass with a tiny note reading, "To be sniffed, not eaten." Article 674. Apparently, the smell is said to prevent indigestion, promote dreams of geese, and repel emotional unclarity. You follow instructions, inhaling the plum's scent deeply, and feel nothing, except perhaps the distant sense of being part of something unfathomably silly. After dinner, you ask Garrett what happens if you break one of these dining rules. He frowns. Depends. For small things like chewing with uneven rhythm, you might get a midnight knock from the culinary examiner. But serious breaches? Improper plum handling? That could go to court. Court. You've heard whispers of it before. Not criminal court, but style court. You're soon ushered into a traveling session of it. The court of aesthetic harmony and temporal compliance. Citizens stand trial for crimes of taste, timing, and symmetry. The judge wears robes half blue, half greener visual metaphor for balance. The audience is silent, save for the rhythmic rustling of verdict scrolls. A woman is brought forward for violating Article 310. No cloak may drag more than 5 finger widths behind its wearer in puddled conditions. Her defense? She had not anticipated puddles. A scribe reads precedent. A child is asked to reenact her walk using an official puddle simulation device, basically a soggy mat. The court murmurs. Then comes the ruling forgiveness, on account of unseasonal weather. You can't believe this is real, and yet the whole town accepts it. Because what's the alternative? Chaos? Style misalignment? One defendant, an elderly man named Osric, seems genuinely pleased to be here. He's on trial for wearing 2 different shades of grey within a 10-foot radius of the regional dye official's home, a violation of Article 285. His defense is poetic. Both greys remind me of my wife. The court weeps. He's acquitted. Back at the inn, you ask the innkeeper if she's ever been cited for style violations. She laughs so hard her cider nearly explodes. Of course, she says. Article 42. My goat wore a scarf that clashed with my apron. I was fined 2 cabbages and had to write an apology poem. You ask to see the poem. She hands you a wrinkled paper. O goat of mine, in clashing hue, thy scarf was bold, thy choices new. Forgive my taste, forgive the scene. Next time we'll match in forest green. You almost frame it, but the best moment comes as you're preparing for bed. The innkeeper gives you a candle, perfectly legal, a biscuit, square-shaped to avoid Article 88. No bedtime food shall have excessive curvature. And a bedtime blessing derived from Article 777, speak one kindness before sleep, or dream only of dust. So you whisper, that pigeon stew wasn't terrible. And just like that, you're part of it, not just an observer of the code, but a temporary, biscuit-eating, candle-blessing, faintly rule-abiding citizen of this odd little dynasty. It's still ridiculous. It's still exhausting. But maybe, just maybe, it works. And tomorrow, you've been promised an introduction to the dynasty's strangest regulation of all, the dream register. But for now, rest. Because in this land, even sleep has bylaws. Morning begins with the sound of regulated rooster calls. Not from the roosters themselves, they are not particularly compliant, but from a boy stationed in the tower with a horn carved to mimic the average pitch and urgency of a rooster's third crow. Article 1022 of the dynasty's Rural Ordinance states, "Should poultry prove inconsistent, municipal youth shall serve as avian proxy." The boy hits the note perfectly, though you suspect he secretly prefers trumpet. You rise and stretch beneath a ceiling beam etched with tiny rules. One reads, "No brushing of teeth while standing on left foot." Another, "Lace shoes in silence before sunrise." You wonder if anyone has ever actually been fined for foot brushing, and immediately decide not to test it. Today, you've been invited to attend a lecture at the House of Codekeepers, the dynasty's official archive, for laws that no one can quite understand, but which must be obeyed anyway, just in case. It's a modest building, low to the ground, with a sign that reads, "The past may be watching." Inside, parchment scrolls line the walls like sleepy snakes. A man in 3 different hats greets you. "Welcome," he says, "to the Department of Interpretive Compliance." He gestures to a scroll labeled Article 877 on the proportional elegance of umbrella used during light drizzle. According to the law, an umbrella must not exceed the circumference of the user's personal shadow at noon, unless the drizzle has lasted more than 11 consecutive minutes, and the user's cloak bears the crest of either House Wren or House Slightly Fox. Historians still argue whether this originated from actual rain-related disputes or a particularly stubborn tailor. The man in the 3 hats continues, "We enforce it only during light fog and social parades." You nod as if that explains everything. It does not. You spend the morning thumbing through scrolls of laws more cryptic than coherent. Article 410, titled simply Cabbage Placement and the Moon, decrees that cruciferous vegetables must not be stored in south-facing rooms during a waxing crescent. Why? No one knows. A footnote adds, "This is not symbolic. That somehow makes it worse." Another clerk presents you with Article 993, a favorite among locals. It's known as the rule of odd socks. If, during a royal inspection, a citizen is found wearing mismatched socks, they must declare a rhyme justifying the fashion. Something like, "Two socks, not the same," "To dodge the rain's game," "Left foot in green," "Right and unseen," punishment for silence, one public apology, and a lecture on symmetry by a visiting monk. Despite how exhausting it sounds, the people here seem to enjoy the game of it all. Rules are like invisible strings that hold their days in place, often absurd, occasionally poetic, sometimes terrifyingly precise. You begin to understand why they cling to it. It's not really about control, it's about certainty in a world that can so easily become chaos. After lunch, which involves a discussion about whether today's beets qualify as gleaming, and therefore fall under the glossy food clause, you wander toward the river. A sign warns you that the Bridge of Modest Crossing operates under a strict courtesy rule. No one may walk across it unless accompanied by either a compliment, a personal lament, or a short riddle. You wait your turn. The old man ahead of you mutters, "Your cloak hangs with elegance, stranger," and is waved forward by a guard in tassels. The next person offers a riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at midday, and wishes it had 3 by sunset? No one answers. She crosses anyway. Your turn. You panic. Then you blurt out, "I once fell asleep during a duel and still survived." A fib, but harmless. The guard nods solemnly. You pass. Across the bridge, a plaque catches your eye. It lists the 5 forgotten articles laws repealed so long ago they've taken on a ghostly status. They include Article 66, no naming of goats after in-laws. Article 122, all pies must contain precisely 7 ingredients unless baked on a Tuesday. Article 399, do not sneeze in the bathhouse more than twice. The third sneeze is considered theatrical. Article 588. Children under 6 may not speak of clouds as if they were animals. Article 719. Should a man dream of fire while sleeping in wool, he must offer 1 bell to the chapel. The guide chuckles behind you. They weren't repealed because they were wrong, he whispers. Only because no one could remember who made them. You nod gravely, as if that's the most reasonable logic you've heard all day. In the late afternoon, you're invited to a local school's graduation ceremonial important event, not for what the children have learned, but for what they are now expected to know. Every student must recite a law from memory, interpret its meaning, and apply it to a modern situation. Little Yuta, age 9, is assigned Article 108. No citizen shall refer to the moon by pet name under conditions of high tide. He interprets this as a metaphor for overfamiliarity during emotional vulnerability. You're impressed. Then comes Mariko, age 12. Her law? Article 321. All ladders stored outdoors must be blessed every 3rd rain. She calmly explains the ancient belief that wet ladders tempted mischievous spirits who might reverse your social fortune. She concludes, to climb with caution is to rise with grace. The room claps so softly it sounds like a breeze. Someone dabs at their eyes. Later, a scribe invites you to contribute to the Registry of Momentary Interpretations, a tradition where visitors invent temporary laws valid for precisely 1 hour. You craft your own. Article Temporary 7. All travelers wearing shoes must declare 1 sincere apology to the ground. The scribe beams. Poetic, practical, slightly muddy. Excellent. Night falls. The lamps in the village glow with oil pressed from dream fruit, a local pear so bland it's said to encourage quiet reflection. You sit in the village square, watching children play under a statute requiring all evening games to include at least 1 invented rule. 2 kids chase each other, shrieking, "No corners! No corners!" You assume that's the rule. As the moon rises, someone hands you a small book titled How to Sleep Without Breaking the Law. Inside are gentle suggestions. Breathe slowly. Align your pillow with the northeast. Hum softly for 3 beats before closing your eyes. And above all, do not dream of revolution. You chuckle, because here, even sleep is structured. Even dreams are subtly legislated. And somehow, despite yourself, you've found peace in it. The code makes no sense, but it makes things make sense. And for now, that's enough. You sleep soundly until a knock at the door startles you into awareness. Not a threatening knock, just precise, rhythmic. 3 soft taps, 1 pause, then 2 more. You sit up, groggy, and remember what the innkeeper told you the night before. If you hear the law knock, don't answer too quickly. That's considered impatient. So you wait a respectable moment, adjust your blanket like you're not flustered at all, and then open the door with as much grace as a half-asleep guest can muster. Outside stands a robed figure in midnight blue, holding a lantern with the dynasty's seal. A duck balancing a scroll on its head. You blink at it. The man introduces himself as a nocturnal auditoran official role described in Article 2041. All inns within dynastic reach shall receive 1 moonlight courtesy inspection per lunar cycle. so that governance may not be burdened by daytime bias. You mumble something like, "Sure," and step aside. He nods appreciatively, takes one slow glance at the candle by your bedside, and notes in a small book, wick properly trimmed, flame behavior, obedient, scent, non-offensive. Then he bows and leaves. And with that, you're wide awake. You wander the quiet halls of the inn, passing soft pools of lamplight and signs warning of night laws. Article 812 says no humming after midnight. Article 813 bans the consumption of extremely round fruit. There's even Article 815, which states that guests must not rearrange their dreams without consulting the dream clerk. You are unsure how to comply with that one. By morning, the audit has passed. A paper is slid under every door with a score. Yours reads, Harmony level, 88/100ths. Deduction for toe tapping during wind lull. You hadn't even noticed. Today, you're heading to the heart of the Dynasty administrative district where laws are born, debated, annotated, and sometimes misfiled for 2 generations before resurfacing during an unrelated tax inquiry. The center of it all is the Civic Hall of Iterative Ordera Grand Building, shaped like a question mark that's been politely corrected. It is, frankly, magnificent. Each stone in the floor represents a statute. Each stairwell curves differently depending on the year its laws were drafted. You're told that the right-wing houses all seasonal adjustments and that during winter months, visitors must walk counterclockwise to align with the Cold Breath Codex. Inside, you're introduced to Archivist Emmy, a woman who walks like punctuation and speaks in clauses. Today, she says, you'll be helping us test Article 1559, which governs conversational posture during interregional greetings. You pause. She clarifies, we're not enforcing it, just feeling it out. You're led into a room where volunteers are trying out different stances while saying things like, good weather from the Western Ridge, or may your geese fly in pairs. One man stands too stiff, he's corrected with a chalk line on the floor. Another slouches too far forward, he's offered a firm but gentle shoulder nudge. You try your best. A soft lean, one foot slightly behind the other, palms open. Emmy nods. Acceptable, perhaps even optimistic. Eventually, you're handed a small pamphlet titled Daily Laws for the Reasonably Alert Citizen. It's a best of compilation streamlined rules for people who want to be lawful but not obsessed. You flip through it. Article 211. If a stranger compliments your cart, you must compliment their hatevan if they wear none. Article 544. When offered soup by someone who has never offered it before, you must sip 3 times before asking the flavor. Article 888. Do not name your child after the wind unless you can pronounce it in 3 dialects. You close the pamphlet and realize something unsettling. It's starting to make sense. In the afternoon, you're taken to meet a law vivera ceremonial role, responsible for translating laws into fabric form. It's part of Article 3010. No decree shall be complete until woven into thread, lest its memory unravel. The weaver, an elderly woman named Satoko, shows you a tapestry depicting Article 77, the duck shall not be crowned. In the woven scene, a duck perches on a stool wearing what appears to be a salad bowl. Around it, nobles weep, peasants kneel, and one monk covers his eyes. Satoko explains, during the First Moon Rebellion, someone tried to install a duck as symbolic regent. It did not go well. You ask what happened. She shrugs. The duck refused to abdicate. Laws, you realize, aren't just rules here. They're stories, symbols, echoes of jokes, disasters, dreams. each one a tiny myth built into daily life, and the people remember them not out of fear, but out of strange, ritualized affection. By evening, you're invited to a meal at the Civic Harmony House, where Article 2011 governs the seating order, and Article 2012 decides who may speak first based on the soup's viscosity. The first course is a beet broth, so thick it qualifies as philosophical. The eldest guest, a retired law writer named Kenjiro, takes the first sip and recites, "By the thickness of root and silence of spoon, let order prevail, and dessert come soon." You nearly laugh, but then realize everyone else is nodding solemnly, so you nod too. Dessert arrives, a jelly molded in the shape of a gavel. It jiggles with authority. After dinner, you're told about Article 999, the so-called politeness finale. It requires that any guest who leaves another's home must do so with a gesture of brief elegance and a parting statement, no longer than 6 syllables. You try, "Thank you for the jelly law." It passes. Later that night, back at the inn, you finally ask the innkeeper a question that's been forming all week. What happens when someone breaks a law and just doesn't care? She gives you a look half mischief, half memory. "Well," she says, "first someone quotes the law, then someone else quotes the punishment, and then, well, the birds remember." You wait for elaboration. She doesn't give it. Instead, she points to a plaque behind the counter that reads, "Article 000, do not ask what the birds know." And you decide, that's probably for the best. The moon rises. You tuck in beneath your legally compliant bedding. Whisper your nightly courtesy phrase, "Let dreams arrive gently," and listen to the quiet rhythm of a town held together by parchment, repetition, and just the right amount of ridiculousness. The parchment feels thin between your fingers, almost brittle, but you keep reading. The ink has faded, but the message is clear enough. This one must not eat pork for 30 moons, or his seed will bear the mark of the serpent. You blink. Then you read it again. And then again, just to be sure. Nope, not a joke, not a scribal error. That's an actual law in this dynasty's bizarre code. But before you get too deep into the meat ban prophecies, let's take a step back. You're still here, in this dim, echoing hall, where the old codes are stored not in some organized archive, but bundled in scrolls, knotted into silk wrappers, and wedged into cubbies like firewood. A bureaucrat-turned-monk shows you the place, a man with a beard that looks like it's been trained by sheer intimidation into a downward arrow. He speaks like every word is a sacred decree, even when he's talking about where they keep the keys to the chicken coop. He tells you this: these aren't just rules, they're stories, they're fears in disguise. Each strange clause was written because something weird happened, or something weird almost happened. Or someone powerful once dreamed that something weird could happen, and in this medieval dynasty, dreaming was sometimes more persuasive than evidence. The dynasty in question? Let's just say they weren't the most famous, snow-glittering capital like Kyoto or Baghdad. No romantic poetry carved into palace stones, but their scribes were exhaustively devoted to the idea of order. Not justice. Not efficiency. Just order. Imagine if Marie Kondo had been a military advisor in the 13th century, and instead of asking what sparked joy, she demanded to know which side of the bed a soldier slept on, and whether his toenail clippings had been properly buried. Because, you see, that was rule number 214. Clippings of the left big toe must not be left above ground, lest the ghosts follow you back from patrol. Yes, that is a real thing. Soldiers had to dig tiny graves for their footbits, probably with a spoon, probably while praying. Historians still argue whether this dynasty really believed in the supernatural consequences of these rules or whether the laws were just methods of control, psychological leashes, tiny acts of humiliation or superstition designed to test who was willing to obey anything, no matter how absurd. The more absurd the rule, the more complete the loyalty. One account, written in crabbed shorthand on bamboo slipstills, of a young commander who dared to whistle after dark. Apparently, rule number 41 forbade whistling after dusk, lest the wind carry your soul out of your body and leave it in a tree overnight. The punishment? 2 weeks of isolation and a forced fast, broken only by bitter tea steeped with crushed cicada shells. Delicious. And definitely memorable. But it wasn't just the military. Oh no, civilians were tangled in the code too, especially when it came to marriage. Let's look at rule number 89. No union may be made between a woman born under a fox, moon, and a man whose mother has twins, for their child shall walk backward before it speaks. This law resulted in actual annulments. Whole families separated because of astrology charts and the moon being in a flirtatious mood when someone was born. Some fringe scholars suggest the code had a secret layerer kind of embedded puzzle, where if you read every 7th law in reverse order, a hidden prophecy would be revealed. Others think that's nonsense, the medieval version of conspiracy theory, the Dan Browning of ancient records. Still, you wonder, because there is a pattern, isn't there? Every law seems to fear the same things: chaos, fertility, infection, and spirits. Which brings us to the hair rule. Now you think you've heard it all, but rule number 307 says this: no man may wash his hair on the 4th day of the goat cycle, lest his thoughts become slippery and treason take root. Imagine your local barber asking, would you like the usual cuter, the treasonous slippery mind wash? You'd say, just a trim, obviously. The goat cycle, by the way, is a calendrical phase they used kind of like a horoscope meets farming almanac. It was the time of the month when certain omens were said to peak. Goats born in this cycle were believed to butt walls for no reason and chew scrolls of legal decisions. So clearly, washing your hair at that time was dangerous. Makes perfect sense. Back to your parchment. The meat ban prophet is one of dozens of odd entries in this codex. Here's another gem. A soldier who eats eel before a battle must dance thrice before crossing water, or his limbs will forget their duties. No one knows if this was a metaphor, or if the dynasty had witnessed one too many embarrassing accidents involving wiggly cuisine and soggy footbridges. And then there's rule number 442, the one about the goose. A captured goose may not be questioned. That's it. That's the law. No one knows why you'd be questioning a goose. But apparently, someone did, and it went badly enough that the dynasty had to write it down. Quirky, yes but. Each of these rules reveals a strange kind of logic. A logic where the boundary between superstition and law is as thin as a rice paper screen, where belief becomes reality through the sheer force of repetition. If your people believe the wind can steal your soul, then maybe the real punishment for whistling isn't isolation. It's the fear your comrades will never look at you the same again. You've become untethered, spiritually contaminated. That's the power of law, not just to punish, but to define what is real, what is acceptable, what is sensible. And this dynasty was deeply invested in being the sole author of sensibility. Sometimes, the strangest rules were the most successful. Take rule number 118. When entering the home of a widow, one must speak only in metaphors for the first 3 sentences. Why? Because direct speech might disturb the spirits of the recently departed. Or perhaps because indirect language gave both parties time to assess intent, emotion, and subtext. In other words, polite awkwardness saved lives. There's a whole chapter on body positioning during rain. Rule number 355, do not stand with your feet more than shoulder width apart when it rains. The ground is listening. Try enforcing that one with a straight face. One scroll even includes a diagram of acceptable umbrella stances to ward off thunder spirits. Spoiler, holding it above your head like a normal person equals fine, but tilting it forward aggressively? Forbidden. Seen as a threat, the umbrella becomes a symbol of arrogance, defying the god's tears. The dynasty eventually faded, as they all do, but their rules lingered like smoke in the rafters. In some rural regions, old people still avoid washing their hair on goat days, still whisper in metaphors when entering mourning homes, still bury toenail clippings just in case. And somewhere, deep in a dusty archive, there's probably still a goose, smugly silent, watching as a clerk fumbles with bamboo slats. You take one last look at the scrolls before you leave the room. One, curled at the edge, catches your eye. You unroll it. The ink is fresh, too fresh. Someone's been adding to the code. Modern anxieties, disguised in antique script. And it hits you. Maybe the strangest rules are still being written. You just don't notice them, because they come dressed in apps and policies and fine print. You roll the scroll back up, place it in the cubby, and bow. It's time to go. The days before battle stretch like the last inhale before a plunge into deep water. You wake up early, not because you want to, but because your body knows that the fields are not fields today. They are prelude. You dress slowly. There's no gleam to your mail, no parade polish to your blade. This isn't ceremony. This is calculation. You're not just preparing to fight, you're preparing to be remembered. Or to vanish. The others are doing the same, though each man wraps himself in routine differently. Some mutter psalms. Others sharpen their blades for the 5th or 6th time, though they've never dulled them. One fellow walks the perimeter of the camp dragging a piece of twine behind him, convinced it will confuse bad spirits. You don't question it, not now. You hear snoring from the next tent over someone seeking escape in sleep. Not you. You're wrapping a scrap of your mother's old apron around your wrist. She said it once kept foxes from the chickens. It can't hurt now. The superstition thickens as the sky bruises into morning. A squire vomits behind a wagon bad stew or bad nerves. Who can tell? One night squire braids a bit of horsehair into his master's beard, whispering a rhyme. Steel to cheek and cheek to sky. Let not your last breath be a lie. It's the day before the clash, and silence isn't silence anymore. It's anticipation's echo. Everything is louder, the creak of leather, the clang of buckles, the grind of boots against frozen mud. And underneath it all, that itchy feeling in your spine, something is watching. You try to shake it. Maybe it's just the pressure of history breathing down your neck. Maybe it's the old knight from Brittany who keeps poking at a scar and saying it sings before bloodshed. You're not sure whether he means it literally or not. You're not sure if you want to know. Midday. Rations come around salt, pork, and something pretending to be barley. No one eats much. There's not enough hunger in the air. Just tension. You sit with a small group of them chewing, the others just staring. One man, lean and limping, pulls out a pouch. From it, he spills tiny carved bones into the dirt. Fox knuckles, he says. Throw them before a fight. If they make a circle, we win. No one laughs. You all lean in. They scatter across the soil like broken stars. One rests near your foot, pointing north. The man stares, nods, and mutters. Close enough. Later that evening, the priests come. Not the polished cathedral men. These are the trench-robed, mud-footed kind. One carries a reliquia bone said to be from St. Sebastian's pinky toe. Another holds a weather-stained book, opened not to scripture, but to a drawing of the Archangel Michael standing over a demon, foot on its chest. "Blessed be the blades," he says, tapping your sword's flat edge. Then he looks each of you in the eye, one by one, and adds, "And may your hearts strike truer than your arms." Some men cross themselves, others simply nod. You walk the perimeter once more. A few boys are lighting candles in a broken helm, making a sort of shrine. Someone has drawn symbols in ash outside the latrine. Protection, penance, maybe both. That night, dreams do not come. Instead, you rehearse. Not just the fight, but the farewell, the last glance over your shoulder, the last breath that smells of wet wool and leather and damp hay. You lie there, not sleeping, just surviving the waiting. Then, in the dead middle of that too quiet stretch between midnight and dawn, there's a noise. Not a trumpet, not a shout, just one long, low howl. Human, animal, both. No one moves. Every ear strains. Every eye stares at the dark. Then the rustling starts, like robes against bark, like whispers learning to walk. A shape darts between tents, then another. Someone swears. Someone grabs a blade. You follow suit. But the noise fades. The shapes vanish. When the guards do their rounds, they find nothing but a few odd footprints and one dead crow on a pike. Morning arrives. The sky is grey, not storm grey, but steel grey, like something watching through a visor. And now it begins. No more rituals. No more charms. It's you, your armor, your blade, and everything you hope works out. You step into line, shoulder to shoulder with the others. Some hum, some pray, some just breathe hard. You glance to your left. The fox-knuckle man is grinning. "Toes pointed right," he says. "That means luck for the left flank." You're on the left flank. You don't know what that means, but you take it. You hold it like a stone in your hand. Because on a day like this, any shape that fits your palm might as well be a shield. And if superstition can't save you, maybe it can at least carry your name a little farther into memory. You lie there, not sleeping, just surviving the waiting. Then, in the dead middle of that too quiet stretch between midnight and dawn, there's a noise. Not a trumpet, not a shout, just one long, low howl. Human, animal, both. No one moves. Every ear strains. Every eye stares at the dark. Then the rustling starts, like robes against bark, like whispers learning to walk. A shape darts between tents, then another. Someone swears. Someone grabs a blade. You follow suit. But the noise fades. The shapes vanish. When the guards do their rounds, they find nothing but a few odd footprints and one dead crow on a pike. Morning arrives. The sky is grey, not storm grey, but steel grey, like something watching through a visor. And now it begins. No more rituals. No more charms. It's you, your armor, your blade, and everything you hope works out. You step into line, shoulder to shoulder with the others. Some hum, some pray, some just breathe hard. You glance to your left. The fox-knuckle man is grinning. Toes pointed right, he says. That means luck for the left flank. You're on the left flank. You don't know what that means, but you take it. You hold it like a stone in your hand. Because on a day like this, any shape that fits your palm might as well be a shield. And if superstition can't save you, maybe it can at least carry your name a little farther into memory. You're no longer sure how long you've been inside the stone fortress. The window sieve, you can call those arrow-slit vents windows let in barely any light, and the hours pass like fog drifting through your mind. But as you sit cross-legged near the scriptorium wall, nursing your last stale bit of oatcake and listening to a monk quietly copy law after law by hand, it begins to dawn on you just how strange the rules in this medieval dynasty's code truly are. By now, you've survived exile, narrowly avoided the shame of marrying into the wrong social tier, been punished for ploughing during a feast day, and even witnessed a man publicly humiliated for eating garlic too close to a noble's manor. Each law felt like it came not from logic, but from some ancient superstition masquerading as royal decree. Like that rule about shoes. Remember it? If a man walks into the local magistrate's hall with mismatched shoes, he could be fined or flogged, depending on the mood of the bailiff. The official explanation? Shoes represent balance, and imbalance in footwear might cause imbalance in the affairs of the realm. Of course, naturally. Some scholars have suggested that these peculiar laws were designed more for symbolism than enforcement. In fact, several early dynastic codes were layered with metaphor, operating more like moral parables than practical judicial systems. But that doesn't help when you're being fined for letting your goat look too long at a temple wall. Yes, that happened. A real edict once dictated that goats were not to be allowed near certain sacred stone structures, lest their bleating confuse the spirits or disrupt the divine aura. You stood there, trying to coax your goat back with a handful of thistle, while a cleric in sandals threatened to confiscate it in the name of regional spiritual harmony. These rules, the real meat of this medieval dynasty's governance, seemed less interested in keeping the peace and more obsessed with maintaining an elaborate theater of symbolism. Don't kneel facing north on moonless nights. Never wear green on the second Tuesday of any given month, unless it's raining. Always greet a noble with your left hand on the third toll of the bell. Every detail of life was filtered through this lattice of superstition, tradition, and enforced conformity. And somewhere behind it all stood the dynasty's code, compiled by monks, scribes, and rulers who were part lawmakers, part storytellers. The laws weren't just about control, they were about identity. Historians still argue whether this obsession with symbolism made the society stronger or more brittle. Some believe it gave the people a clear, if eccentric, moral compass. Others argue that it tied them up in a web of pointless rituals that stifled innovation and inflamed petty rivalries. You think about that, staring at the wall. Above the scriptorium's doorway is a painted plaque that reads, "The law is the ink by which peace is drawn." It's poetous, if not particularly practical. Then there's the law of bread. Yes, bread. According to one code, only certain households were permitted to bake wheat loaves. Everyone else had to settle for rye, oat, or barley. Baking above one's station was grounds for severe penalty, ostensibly to preserve the hierarchy of the grain. You remember a widow in a village you passed through, weeping as soldiers broke her oven because she dared bake a fluffy wheat roll on a saint's feast day. Or the rule about music. No peasant could play a stringed instrument with more than 3 strings. Lutes with 4 or more were considered instruments of the elite, and therefore off-limits. What was the fear? That a labourer might strum a tune too close to nobility. Oddly enough, many of these rules weren't uniformly enforced. It all depended on who noticed and who you offended. Let your cousin marry a local magistrate's niece, and suddenly you could wear both green and play a 5-string lute. Displease a cleric, and you'd be punished for tying your hose too tight. A wandering scribe once told you, "The law in these parts is like the wind gentle to the chosen, harsh to the cracked window." You never quite forgot that. And tonight, as the fire flickers low and the monk beside you hums softly while copying another decree about forbidden candle scents during equinox, you realize he might have been right. But here's the strangest part. In all the years you've spent dodging these baffling rules, You've started to find a strange comfort in them. Not the rules themselves, but the consistency, the rhythm. There's a ceremony to surviving here, a flow. You begin to understand why villagers mutter charms while drawing water, or why tailors hem their sleeves with an odd number of stitches, or why young children are taught to bow in threes, not once, not twice, but 3 times to each elder. It's not just compliance, it's choreography. You recall the time a magistrate's court tried a rooster for crowing before dawn on a holy fast. They actually brought the bird in. A clerk read charges aloud. The rooster stared blankly and preened. It was sentenced to exile. They walked it 3 miles outside town and let it go near the river. Justice? Or just a performance for the benefit of the villagers? Sometimes you think, it's all theatre, the entire law code, a grand morality play, reminding people of their roles, their limits, and the stories they tell themselves to survive. In the end, you've made it through. You haven't been exiled, you haven't been executed for looking at a statue with the wrong expression. You haven't been stoned for drawing a fish with an even number of scales, yes. That was a thing too. And most importantly, you haven't gone mad. Because the trick to surviving in this medieval dynasty isn't memorizing every rule. It's learning to feel the flow of them, to know which ones matter, which ones don't, and when to pretend. So, as dawn begins to lighten the horizon through the cracks in the fortress wall, you stretch your aching legs and rise. The monk nods, hands you a dried plum wrapped in linen, and mutters, "Today, no sweeping before noon. The spirits are still dreaming." You nod, solemnly. Of course. The battle drums are long silent now. The earth has swallowed the clash of steel and the whispers of charms sewn into sleeves. What remains is a world quieter than it ever was, a world that remembers. Somewhere, a worn boot still rests beside a shriveled sprig of rosemary. Somewhere, a broken charm made of twine and bone waits in the dirt for someone to believe in it again. You walk slowly now, away from the campfires of old. The wind is softer than before, brushing against your cheeks like the fingertips of a mother who once tucked you in. The weight of armor lifts. The smell of smoke fades. You feel your steps growing lighter, as though the superstitions that once clung to your shoulders have gently let go. There is peace in knowing that even fear has a history and that you are part of it. Not the swords, not the banners, just the quiet in between, the moments of stillness before dawn, the muttered prayers, the shared bread, the deep breath before a charge. You lie back in your own quiet now. Let your breathing slow. Let the stories drift. You're safe. You're home. And the ghosts of old soldiers are still listening. Sweet dreams.